So I've heard a lot of people talk about how you should try to inhibit your traps in various exercises, mainly lateral raises, but there are also a few others that I could think of, biceps, triceps training, those kinds of things. And while you don't necessarily want to feel your traps like on fire, if they're not a primary target of the exercise, trying to limit trap involvement in general is a really, really terrible, awful, terrible idea. So we're going to talk about why today, and specifically go over the function of the traps and why you should pay special attention to them in your training, not just from a size standpoint, but from like a neurological function-based standpoint, because they are incredibly important. So 3 divisions of the traps. Technically, you could subdivide them into more, but most people know them as upper, middle, and lower. And they are going to, and I have my little skeleton model here to help us out. They're going to span across different portions of the back. Okay, so the upper traps, and I have a cute little fiber here to try to maybe demo this. Hopefully this will move in focus at some point. Okay, cool. And apologies for the noise. This is Skeleton Steve. He may jiggle around a little bit. So the upper trap is basically going to run up from the neck, like the higher cervical spine, down at this sort of like pretty steep angle, and forward actually onto and underneath of the clavicle. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, this is the clavicle. The upper trap actually, this is like, for some reason, not very talked about thing. The upper trap comes down from the back of the neck and actually slips underneath of the clavicle right here. And not only does it attach to the clavicle, more so the sort of underside of the clavicle, but it comes out and it attaches onto the side of the shoulder blade onto the acromion, right? So it'll attach somewhere around yay, right? And if you can sort of picture that fiber direction, it would be sort of coming up and sort of, sloped up and in toward the neck at sort of this direction, right? This is my right scapula, it would be going that way. So that's the upper trap. The middle trap runs from basically where the thoracic spine starts, right? So where you see these ribs start, and the middle trap is going to span a few ribs down and run onto the sort of middle of the shoulder blade, somewhere on what's called the scapular spine. It'll attach basically where the upper trap ends, right? So upper trap, clavicle to acromion, middle trap, spine, and it'll come more directly across. If you've heard of the rhomboid sits underneath of that at a little bit more of a steep angle. The middle trap sits a little bit more straight, sort of like that. And then the lower trap is actually going to run down from, I forget the specific rib, but somewhere around here down toward the bottom of the rib cage, and it'll run up and attach actually to the most medial or inner border of that spine. So from like a clear standpoint, it'll be like upper trap, clavicle, which is not here, right? Clavicle is sitting somewhere at this angle, angle, and it'll run underneath and sort of onto that clavicle that way. It'll also attach to the acromion, and then the middle trap will span from here to roughly here, and then the lower trap will span from here downward onto the multiple attachments on the spine. And so you might think like, oh, what are the joint actions that it tends to create? But the way that I like to think about the upper trap's function is more as like a force resistor. I know that's not really a correct technical term, but I think it's very helpful for conceptualizing its function and just understanding how important it is. Anytime you have any muscle at any point put any amount of force on the shoulder, all these guys need to contract, okay? Doesn't even matter if it's a force direction that looks like it wouldn't be involved in. If there's a force that wants to pull this way or this way, which pretty much always happen at the same time, right? These two are attached by tons of connective tissue. Anytime that there's any force on the arm, these guys, right, that run literally from most of the spine, to be honest, from all the way down to the bottom of the ribs, all the way up to the top of or basically the base of the skull, and attached to the shoulder blade, keep the shoulder blade from magically just flying off of your body, okay? So let's pick an example. Picture your rear delt, okay? A lot of people know rear delts, like, they do rows and stuff like that. Rear delt attaches at portion of the arm, basically close to halfway down the arm, and it'll run up and back and sort of run with a fiber direction. If I can manage this, that's kind of like this, okay? So basically the function of that guy is to extend the shoulder, i.e. pull the arm back. And so those rear delt fibers will just pick, the sort of middle line of them, run something like this, and if you can picture the arm being over here, I'm not gonna do that for now, right? They're gonna run somewhere this way. And when those fibers contract, we all sort of tend to think about more of like the higher degree of motion-based actions, right? So my arm moving back in space is an obvious example. But what happens when this tugs on the scapula, because muscles pull from all of their attachments at the same time, right? They're just pulling inward. They will actually pull the scapula with a force that's sort of like this, right? If you can sort of picture that, right? So if only my rear delt contracted, right, and everything else tried to sort of stay the same, what it would do if my arm were static and just not moving is it would actually pull the scapula forward and almost sort of like tip it in a way where like you would see a traditional scapular winging, if you've heard of that. And if the traps, specifically in this case, right, remember we went over the anatomy, the middle trap in this case, right, because it's on the direct opposite side of this scapular spine, if the middle trap doesn't co-contract correctly, and the upper trap as well, obviously, with this too, right, because the more you move this way, the more you get closer to that upper trap. But if you contract a rear delt and you don't have an equal and opposite pull that is keeping the scapula on the body, or at least very close to it, through the entirety of the contraction, you're gonna have a situation where the scap goes, boop, pops right off, right? Obviously, there are specific neurological deficits, disorders that is the case in, and I think a good example may be something like scapular dyskinesis, which is probably stepping out of my wheelhouse to say, but anyway, look into it if you would like. But that's kind of like the primary role, or that's how I like to look at the primary role of the traps. Take other examples, right? Take the lats and the pecs, which attach directly to the arm. Those will not only have, let's say my pec is contracted, it's coming around and across, right? I'm stretching and contracting my pecs this way. Anytime that I have any amount of force, that my pec is creating this way, right? It's actually pulling the arm down in this direction, but it's also to some degree trying to pull the arm down this way and sort of out of its socket, right? And so obviously these two things need to stay together. And part of what holds the scapula into a position where these ligaments don't have to work a ton and this rotator cuff doesn't have to work a ton is where this scap isn't just flying around all the time, i.e. a position where the upper traps, the middle traps, and the lower traps can run again along all these borders, in addition to the clavicle obviously as well, like we said, and provide a source of stability for this guy, for this arm to be able to act and co-contract and create force when we're trying to train in the gym, right? So any lat contraction, any pec contraction, any teres major, infraspinatus, teres minor, supraspinatus, like name the muscle that attaches to the shoulder blade, name the muscle that attaches to the humerus. If it is contracting, the traps are contracting. And the traps specifically are contracting so that you can actually produce the maximum amount of force that you're capable of. You'll see this a lot of times in people who, maybe don't have the best shoulder health, right? They're constantly complaining about their shoulders. You see they actually never include any really, I hate this word, but functional trap work, right? Where they're getting their arms up fully overhead. Maybe they're doing a cable raise or even a dumbbell raise or maybe something like a wire raise. So I love those type motions where you're getting the arm up overhead because there is a ton of scapular motion. I love motions where you are doing full retraction based rows, rows where your arm is coming across your body, just basically all these different positions where your scap has to sort of move into the different positions that it's capable of so that the traps can learn how to manage the position of this guy, obviously in tandem with this guy, throughout any portion of those different ranges. So hopefully that was a insightful little spiel to get into. Again, just to sort of recap and review, if we have any force in summary, and this is the matching scapula for this little guy, right? Or sorry, this little guy on the other side. If we have any force that wants to pull this guy, and I actually have a fiber here, like that's supposed to represent like a pec or a lat, that's gonna pull the arm this way, right? There's gonna be a force that tips this scapula like that, right? And all these traps that attach all along the scapular spine and all along that acromion and all along that clavicle that's not there, but is over here, right? Those guys are gonna be the guys to say, suck it right back, make sure that it stays in place. And not only that it stays in place, but also so that you can put your shoulder blade into a position that's advantageous for the particular scenario, for the particular context, because it's different with every exercise. So not only are these guys incredibly involved in actually force production, right? As I mentioned, your pec output, your lat output will be limited or created by the amount of output in your traps, but also just from a functional motion-based perspective, your traps are going to be the prime movers of this guy and controllers of this guy in addition to the serratus anterior, which everyone loves to give love to, but no one loves to give love to the traps. So if you have any questions about this, please drop them in the comments below and let me know kind of how you like this more lecture style video. It's, you know, pretty easy for me to make and just sort of go off the top with, and yeah, let me know what questions you all have next for a potential next video, and I will hopefully answer them at some point soon.